Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 11 of The Last Battle, The Pace Quickens.
Well said. Don't touch that dial. There's nothing wrong with the audio. Daniel's just going to do this sped up.
You listen to this 2x speed on Audible. Mm-hmm. I skipped every other word when reading it. We have no idea what's happening in this chapter.
Right. Had to try 2 or 3 times, which ended up taking longer than just reading it at a regular pace.
Really work out all that well. Last episode, I said that in this chapter, the last battle was going to be fought, and there's really 2 battles or 2 skirmishes that take place here, but I read ahead because I'm allowed to, and it's actually in the next chapter, chapter 12, that C.S. Lewis says the last battle begins. So I'm a little confused as to what happens in this particular chapter, because I would have assumed that this was the last battle.
This was a very difficult chapter to read. There was a lot of killing.
This was a dark chapter.
A lot of talking beasts died.
We're gonna get into this, especially with the horses, man. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We had a lot, and the bear. Oh, the poor bear.
Yeah, I did not enjoy that part.
Yeah, a lot of really interesting things happen here. Lewis is not pulling any punches as an author. I don't actually remember where I read this, and maybe it's better that I don't remember because I didn't like this. But somewhere throughout this whole last season, I came across. Maybe it was like a review. Maybe it was when I was doing Goodreads. Maybe because remember at the beginning of the season, I went through the Goodreads reviews and I read.
I know what you're gonna say, and it does feel like a Goodreads.
It was way too many. And it said it was like halfway through the last battle, Lewis switches from children's literature to young adult literature, and I remember just being kind of disgusted by that. But I will say there is these last few chapters, and especially in this chapter, there is a significant shift in what Lewis is showing us as readers. Well, we've had battles before, but Lewis rarely describes them. And even here, there's that 2-minute long battle where Eustace really just looks down at the dead animal at his feet. And we don't actually have the description of the skirmish itself, but we do see a lot of the aftermath in a much more disturbing way than when Edmund gets a little boo-boo that Lucy has to pour some juice onto, right?
Right.
Which I realized that's he was dying. Sorry, but
yeah,
it does feel significantly different here. Well, anything you want to talk about before we jump into this chapter itself?
No, let's dive in. You have a summary, I assume.
I do. Summary number 11, or for chapter 11 here. I only have I think 2 more to go after this.
Whoa.
Or maybe it's 3 more. I can't remember if there's 16 or 17 chapters in the book, but we are really getting to the end. Chapter 11.
16 total.
16 total. So yeah, I only have 2 more after this.
Wow.
Chapter 11. King Tyrion jumps into the light and calls the loyal Narnians to him. Rishta realizes his danger and retreats to his men. Shift is too slow and is thrown into the stable where he is devoured by Tash. And a few loyal Narnians rally to their king. The small squad of loyal Narnians face a fierce fight from 15 Calormans. Both sides face losses, and the Calormans retreat to call for reinforcements. During the short lull, a large group of talking horses make for the Narnians. To the horror of all the onlookers, the dwarves, who continue to reiterate that they are not on either side, kill every single horse with their arrows. Overwhelmed and angry, the Narnians charge the Calorman army while Jill and Farsight attack from the air. Although the Calormen suffer heavy losses, their reinforcements arrive, spelling doom for our heroes.
It's a dark chapter.
Yeah, but there's still a ways to go, which is really interesting.
Yes.
And then there's obviously a lot to unpack that we will not do today because we have to stop here. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is that scene with the horses feels non-Narnian in a way. It feels like something we haven't seen before, where you just have... It's really just a slaughter. It's not fighting in a battle or dying heroically. It's just completely being slaughtered before you can even enter the battle.
I have a theory about this.
Well, you will get... Oh, yeah. Do you want to tell me?
My theory is the reason I think the slaughter came from Lewis's time with World War I.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because that was the first time that we had machines that could take out so many people, and the honor and the glory of war very quickly faded.
Sure.
Because the previous wars had been done on horseback. And this one, World War I, started on horseback and ended with tanks. But machine guns were introduced for the first time in a conflict like this. And people would train up and go out and just die.
Yeah.
In these massive numbers. And I think that was directly influencing this chapter.
Yeah. And we'll have so much more to say when we get there. I'm really excited about it. Well, that sounds weird to say excited, but I'm excited for the conversation. I am.
Yeah.
Also, the horses aren't real, so it's okay.
Right.
Any other thoughts about the beginning of this chapter?
I feel like the momentum carried really smoothly from last chapter directly into this. And we also had 2 or 3 moments of bright hope. And then it's squashed.
Yeah.
And then even more hope. And then it's taken away. And then it just never recovers from that.
You know, Lewis begins this chapter telling us 3 things happen all at once. First, Rishta sees this, and he very wisely decides to take a few steps back, right? Lewis even tells us and I love his characterization here. He's not a coward. He's many things, but he's not a coward. And that he would have fought, but he was prudent and was like, look, I can't take on the eagle and the unicorn. I can handle Tyrion and the dwarf, but not these other 2 along with them. And so he kind of takes a step back to find his reinforcements. And then at the same time, Tyrion and Poggin take care of Shift. He's done. Shift is out of here. I mean, he really has been relatively powerless the last few chapters. We've seen that he is really just a pawn for Rishta and Ginger. But of those 3 now, only Rishta is left. Shift is thrown in there. There's this bright light that happens, and he appears to be devoured up. And we talked about last time that it appears Tash is inside of there. And so he's gobbled up and gone.
Right. And that it gets an interesting reaction from everyone around. I think Rishta starts believing at this point.
It's that
all
line.
It took was some blue-green light.
Yeah,
and the earthquake.
We talked about it in the last chapter that he called upon these demons and now they've arrived. You know, and that fear really strikes at him. Right? Farsight says, "There goes one who has called on gods he does not believe in. How will it be with him if they have really come?" So Tash is here. And Rishta even, I guess we'll talk about it right now because he doesn't appear much in this chapter. We see some of his actions, but we don't hear a lot from him. He even talks about putting all the Narnians into the stable, lighting it on fire as this form of sacrifice to Tash, which is, you'll love this from Rishta because, and he's, I don't remember who it is, but one of the Narnians kind of calls this out and was like, no, dude, you didn't believe in this like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You're clearly just trying to be like, hey, I was on your side the whole time.
Right? Because I put all those people in the stable and lit it on fire.
And what's even interesting about Rishta's plan here is that it would just so happen to also potentially take care of Tash as well, right? He's still got that little bit of unbelief. Like, I know there's a demon in there, but maybe I can just burn him out, right? Like if I throw the Narnians in and light it on fire, maybe the demon will go away too, right?
Yeah.
So this happens. Shift is taken care of, and at the same time, I'm sure you loved this. All of the dogs go to King Tyrion. They all choose the side. I think also we get a boar, and we get the bear who will soon die in the battle, and then a bunch of like small mammals, which I guess you're like, thanks, but I mean we have a bunch of mice. I get Reaper sheep was a big deal.
Yep.
And I assume these are larger mice because they're obviously talking mice, but you would have hoped for some of the larger animals to also have joined in.
Yes, and shout out to Tyrion, he uses them really well.
Yeah, it's like go.
He doesn't put them into battle. He says, go get someone who can actually help.
Were you happy that all the dogs joined the side of the Narnians?
I'm always concerned when a dog is introduced, especially in a war. I don't watch films about dogs.
Okay.
Usually.
Yeah, you're not a big Marley and Me fan.
No, I'm not. Yeah. How did you know that? I just haven't seen it. But I also was a little nervous because there's a gigantic battle going around and it didn't turn out too well for the dogs.
I've got to say, I thought this was a little bit of propaganda from Lewis that I was not a fan of. The one cat we've come... I guess technically Aslan is a big cat, but let's put that aside for a moment. The one cat we've come across was just an all-out evil bad guy. And then all of the dogs are good. I think that's a little too pro-dog, anti-cat for my taste. I think I've gone on record on the show that I like cats a lot more than I like dogs. You made a face like you don't know that that's true.
No, I just don't agree with you.
Oh, that's fine. We can totally disagree about that, but we do not have a cat because my wife is wildly allergic to them. She's also allergic to dogs, but I don't want a dog, so I'm not as upset about that one.
Yeah.
But the cat one, kind of a bummer.
You've got the robot R2D2, and
we do have the robot R2D2 in my son's room, which we do feed regularly. It's for some reason it doesn't work that well.
Your son?
No, the robot. It's not working. We keep putting water inside of it.
Who do you feed regularly?
Well, I feed my kid. Yeah.
You keep putting water in R2D2 and you're surprised it doesn't work?
I guess I put water into my son. That just, usually you would say I feed him, but yes.
And water him, I guess.
I water my kids. Yeah, exactly.
Explains why he's sprouting up so fast.
He does keep growing.
Here's the thing that's confusing about this battle. There are only 15 dogs. I don't know how many horses there are, but maybe 20?
Let's say 20. Let's just throw that out there.
This is a very small scale conflict.
Well, I mean, that's why I was saying maybe that's why Lewis says, or at least the narrator says in the next chapter, well, now the last battle has begun. Because at the end of this chapter, all of these reinforcements arrive, right? But I think the small amount of troops that we have here, right? Kind of the low participation reminds us of just really how tragic this is. It's not that there aren't a lot of people there or a lot of animals there. We see that when Tyrion calls and the dogs show up and these small mammals and then the bear and the boar, most of the animals are just kind of waiting off to the side, right? They say, dozens of voices. So we're talking dozens upon dozens, right? Of voices are just too afraid of Tashlin, right? And so they don't participate. Yeah. The dwarves are also there, and until the horses show up, they also don't participate. What's the last battle is not some heroic last stand. This is not like the Battle of Thermopylae, right? Where you're going to lose, but it's this beautiful heroic display of courage and valor and chivalry. It's not that. It's like it's most of the people being like, "Nah, I'm out. Nah, we're okay. I'm not going to pick a side one way or the other."
Yeah, we'll just watch.
And it's that makes it takes some of the glory away from that. And actually, I'll get to this in a minute when we talk about the dwarves. Lewis would have been someone who, and he talks about this in one of his essays, would have been someone who is not romantic about the idea of war, but he also isn't completely disillusioned from it either, right? I think he looks at some of the pre-World War I views of war in the Western world, and then he looks at a lot of the more modern ideas in his time of after the Great War. He says that both of those have something wrong with them. In fact, I'll just go ahead and read this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but this is in an essay he wrote in 1946 called Talking About Bicycles, which is weird that we talk a lot about war in this. But here's actually what he had to say about war and what he called a re-enchanted view of war. He said, "We know how much of the reality the romantic view left out, but we also know that heroism is a real thing, that all the plumes and flags and trumpets of the tradition were not there for nothing. They were an attempt to honor what is truly honorable, what was first perceived to be honorable precisely because everyone knew how horrible war is." He then goes on to even mention, like Homeric poetry being, Homer celebrating heroism, but understanding that what price has been paid in order for that heroism to be able to, like the price that's paid for during war. And so I don't think Lewis is painting war as completely, and we know he's not a pacifist, right? But he also is not someone who says, well, it's all just this beautiful ideal. It's complicated and nuanced. And we see a lot of that nuance here. Our heroes do have in many ways, heroic final stand, or they're beginning this final stand, but it also is like, it's just sad, It doesn't rouse your blood and get you excited. You just go, oh,
yeah, It definitely takes away the allure of
sure, that's good, yeah.
of battle that is introduced so much. Look at what we tend to watch. There's almost always a conflict, a giant battle 20 minutes from the end of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's just everybody get together. Every Marvel movie seems to have this. It's a giant battle, lots of fighting, and it is glorified. And I think it's, personally for me, it's fine to have that in stories. This feels so much more real for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's fantasy. I know that we don't have a talking bear and a talking boar. But I think because we've spent so much time with these characters and so much time in this universe, and because it's so well written, this is just a different view, and it's not being introduced as, and then they saved everybody by beating everybody else. They lost and they took a hit. And it's similar to Infinity War, this new trend of breaking movies into 2 parts and having them lose halfway through that series. Where I haven't seen Mission Impossible Part 1, the Mission Impossible 7 Part 1.
Oh, yeah,
but I imagine the reason they did that is
20 years ago. If you haven't seen Mission Impossible, 30 years
30
ago.
years ago. Yeah. I don't know, but I imagine that what they did is they had it not end well, so that they could have a movie that doesn't have a happy ending, and then they can redeem it later and have it go better.
I'm thinking about the ways that Lewis has depicted battles over the course of the Chronicles, and I'm thinking particularly about the end of Wardrobe and the end of Caspian, because I also think that it would be wrong, and you're alluding to this, and I agree with you. You're alluding to the fact that it's not inherently wrong to show war or battles between good and evil, which this clearly is between good and evil, right? That are where the stakes are relatively low for us as readers or as viewers, pretty much for us as the third party, the audience. That very much is the case in Wardrobe, the book. The movie is different. It does give you a lot more weight and gravity to that, but in the end of Wardrobe, Lewis kind of just rushes through that battle. It's like a paragraph long, right? And even the second battle of Baruna at the end of Caspian, we get a lot more between Miraz and Caspian, right? Miraz and Peter fighting, right? And then we do see, like when the trees show up in Caspian, we do see some of that. But again, there has to be brutality there because it's 2 armies fighting. Lewis doesn't even really allude to that in one way. And I don't think that's inherently wrong, in the same way that, I've talked to you before about how we watch in this home. We're recording in my house right now. In this home, we watch the abridged Star Wars movies. So my son...
Custom edited by you.
Yes. Like when we watch A New Hope, the movie itself is about 2 hours long. When we watch it, it's about 1 hour and 5 minutes long. We skip over just certain things. I'm like, when we first showed it to me, he was 2. So obviously he's 2. So we skip over certain parts. One of the things we don't skip over, though, is when Luke blows up the Death Star, right? Yeah. And that's because the movie doesn't treat it as if hundreds of thousands of people are dying when that thing blows up. Now, it's clear that Tarkin is inside, right? But the movie is like, it's clear good guys versus bad guys. And so even when you watch that in its full, maybe you're 4 or 5 years old, you could, or when you watch it as an adult, you don't sit there and ponder like, oh my goodness, some of those stormtroopers aboard might have just been doing their job. That's not what Lucas is interested in right there. It's just good versus evil. And that part of the brutality of war is not the focus of the story. And I think that's fine because, again, it's a story about bad guys versus good guys, which is a very real thing. But then there's other times where, if you want to keep with Star Wars, and you can talk about Rogue One, right? Or if we want to stay with Narnia, which is more appropriate for us, when we get to the last battle, we see what those battles really mean, what the cost of them are. And it's not like there wasn't a cost during Wardrobe. We see a little bit of it with Edmund, right? But we really feel it here in Last Battle. And I think Lewis is preparing us for the worst.
Yeah. I'm curious what changed. I don't know if this was always the plan. Maybe Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe. I can't remember if he knew that he had more books coming when he was doing the first one.
But I think when he finished, there's a great, it's in the appendix here. Actually, I can look at it right here. Paul F. Ford's. Good thing we're recording at my house today.
Yeah, you have all your books.
To Narnia here. He has an appendix at the very end, which if listeners have not, I don't know if I've ever mentioned the appendices before. They're significantly shorter than the Lord of the Rings appendices. Each one is 1 page.
That is short.
But it says here, so he has one for the chronology of the composition and publication of the Chronicles of Narnia. And Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is finished in spring of 1949. That is also the same season, the same time that he begins the LaFay fragment, that early draft of The Magician's Nephew, but he has begun nothing else. So he finishes Wardrobe before beginning anything else that will ever be published. I don't know. Have we mentioned this, just since I have it in front of me here? I think we've mentioned this before, but if we haven't.
How The Last Battle was written before.
The Last Battle, he starts writing that in the fall of 1952, and he finishes it in spring of 1953 before he has finished The Magician's Nephew. The Magician's Nephew is the last book that he completes. But yeah, so it's finished and just kind of waiting around for...
Don't tell HarperCollins or they'll start publishing it.
Let's publish it in the order in which Lewis completed them. Yes. And in that case, here's how it would be, just in case anyone is curious. Here's the way that in, 30 years from now, here's how you'll buy it at Barnes & Noble. Or you'll... do you think... Yeah, hopefully Barnes & Noble will still be around. So it would be Lion, the Witch, of the Wardrobe, then Prince Caspian, then Dawn Treader, then Horse and His Boy... then Silverchair, then The Last Battle, then Magician's Nephew.
Wow.
That would be something.
At this point, where we are with stories, and we've had so many prequels come out, that would actually kind of be okay.
I mean, many of our listeners have sent us emails before, have told us, and like you and me, people don't always read these in order. We do make a big deal about you should read them in publication order, and my children will. But a lot of people don't, and that's okay.
Sometimes you have to start with the one that's available.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in this house, we have multiple copies of every book.
I was going to say, I can see at least 2 copies.
There's also one in there. And you also remember,
3.
I have a whole classroom with my own library of books. I have more books in my classroom that are mine than I do here in my own house.
I think this was more of an excuse in the 90s. When we didn't have as many copies. Everybody just had one, but now we have, and we're podcasters. You have
we
to have
have
multiple
to.
copies.
It's part of the deal.
The job. Just part of the job.
Well, back to this chapter. This battle we've been talking about, it does take place. There's about 15 Calormans. The Narnians get together, and we get we get Jill Pole here, really taking care of business. I believe it's her that takes out a Calorman. She takes out a satyr, right? Tyrion says, "Well done" to her. And by the time they arrive, we're told that Eustace could never remember what happened. He does look down, and he sees that there is a fox lying dead at his own feet, but he doesn't remember what happened. And two dogs have died. One of them is really hurt. There is some of the Calormans who have died. No, sorry, 3 dogs have died. Some of the Calormans have died. And we get a line from the bear. Here's what Lewis says, and you alluded to this, and I think this is, again, actually a pretty strong allusion to the world during the Great Wars. The bear lay on the ground, moving feebly. Then it mumbled in its throaty voice, bewildered to the last. I don't understand. Laid its big head down on the grass as quietly as a child going to sleep, and never moved again. The bear throughout this entire book has been the one asking questions of Shift, kind of mostly clueless the whole time. And so this bear begins the story clueless, doesn't know what side to join, and you get the sense that at the end, the bear himself is still not even sure that he was on the right side. This is not an animal that dies a noble death for a cause that he believed in. It's an animal who dies and doesn't understand what he's fighting for. And this is a critique that many writers in the early to mid 20th century forgive about World War One, and then later World War Two as well too, is that many people don't. It's more about World War One, I would say, than World War Two.
You're referring to the Lost Generation?
Yeah, the Lost Generation, just the idea that there's a lot of people fighting and dying for they don't know what, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there aren't such things as a just war. And I think there's many people who do die this way, but I do think who do die in war knowing that what they're doing is a good thing. It's a noble death. In fact, we hear a little bit more about noble deaths later on in this book. So I'm not at all saying that doesn't exist. I absolutely believe it exists. But the tragedy of the bear, who does die fighting for the right side, I believe that the bear has a noble death because the bear dies on Aslan's side. But the bear doesn't realize that, right? And I think this is where Lewis is maybe different from some of his more cynical. Speaking of cynical, we'll get to this with the dwarves in a moment. I think this is where he is a little bit more different than some of the other cynical writers of his time. And, you know, goodness gracious, I'm totally blanking on the name of the man who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. Do you have it? Do you know it?
Not off the top of my head.
The school I used to teach at, we had our 8th graders read it, and man, it's a tough read. It's a really tough read, but a lot of the disillusionment that occurs in that book just has to do with soldiers just dying and being plowed down in trenches or with machine gun fire or tanks, and so many of them dying and the question being like, what was this worth? You know, cool, we gained a few inches on the front lines. That's what I died for. And then the war ends. And if you're thinking about the Great War before World War II happens, especially, and you're sitting there, you go like, what was all of that for? We just went home and, you know, all of these young boys died, and it feels like it might have been for nothing. And so I think a lot of authors say, well, it was for nothing. I think where Lewis is different.
It was Eric Maria Remarque, by the way.
Where is he from?
German author.
Okay. I think where Lewis is different here is that Lewis would say that is true. It is true that people die without knowing for what they're dying for, but there is always hope in that there's something greater than you, and even if you don't understand it, it can still make for a noble, sacrificial, a good death, if you will. Right? And I don't think that's true of everything. I don't think that's Lewis saying, well, even if all these boys go out and die, it's totally fine. And, you know, oh, they're on the British side, so they're good. You know, I don't think I think it's more nuanced and complicated than that. But I think that his version of this dying and not understanding still has hope. Even if it's it's not a lot of hope, but there still is hope there, despite the tragic nature of the bear's death here. We know that the bear died fighting for the right side.
Yeah. I also think there may be a double meaning to the I don't understand. I think he may not understand why it's over so quickly for him.
Oh, that's true too.
Where it all happened very quickly. He doesn't seem incredibly quick in the mind. And I think it's just a confusing thing, but he did try. But to me, it shows there are people that are victims of a war that they didn't choose, they didn't want to be a part of, and that feels very familiar from the recent, as in the past 100 years history that we've 110 years now that we've learned about.
Well, as this is right after this happens, we start hearing the drums as the Clormans call for reinforcements, and we have the dwarves be very clear that they are not going to help.
Where are the dwarves for this?
This is weird.
This is very odd. I would love for if Netflix ever gets to make all of them, I would love to see how they handle this, because it seems like they're at a hockey game and they're like on the third row behind the glass, just saying all this stuff and then sniping people at the same time.
Yeah, it's a little confusing here, because you assume that we still have a lot of the other Narnians watching. And I guess as the Narnians fight and the Clormans fight, and again, there's not that many. There's there's 15 Clormans. I guess we had our 7 Narnians plus a couple of other friends and the 15 dogs all fighting. And I guess just watching as one group of Narnians and watching as one group of dwarves, and the Clormans are just fine with that. You know, I mean, the Narnians wouldn't just turn and start murdering people, but the Clormans surely would, right? It's very interesting that they're just allowed to. I didn't know that you could go out and do this, although this was the thing. I know, especially, you know, there's so many different battlefields here in Virginia for the Civil War, Revolutionary War too, but especially for the Civil War. And so I spent, you know, every year in elementary school visiting, you know, a Civil War or Revolutionary War battlefield. And I remember one of the things that I always thought was so interesting is how many people would have a family picnic to go watch some of these battles that would take place. Like there were families during the Revolutionary War when the Redcoats would meet the Continental Army, and they would just obviously, stand in a straight line and fire at each other. At least the Redcoats did, which is why we won. Mm-hmm. And people would get like a picnic together. They go watch. It was like an entertainment thing, which is just unfathomable for us, right? And some of that's because of what happened in World War I. Like that idea of just going and watching a battle. But I think the thing that I always worried about as kids, I'm like, well, weren't they worried about getting hit? And I remember asking I remember this pretty like vividly. I was in middle school. This was Pamplin Park, which is south of Petersburg, and a Civil War battlefield. I remember asking, like, weren't they afraid of getting shot or hurt? And like, oh, well, no, both sides knew you didn't shoot the spectators. I was like, oh, like I didn't realize that was allowed. Like,
it's one of those things where the unspoken rule and the understanding only lasts so long.
Yeah.
For example, just standing in a row and shooting at each other like respectable gentlemen.
There's that great meme where it's I love history memes. Like that's a Reddit, not just the idea of history memes, but there's a Reddit subreddit that's hilarious history memes. And one of my favorite ones. Why am I? This is the second time this season I've tried to explain a meme on an audio podcast. But someone's asking a British general, like, why aren't we firing? He's like, it's not our turn. Like, how dare you? You know, like, we need to wait your turn. Don't you have any manners? Like,
yeah.
You know.
What would people think?
So it's unclear what the dwarves are doing here or where they're standing. I think you're probably right. It's probably behind some kind of hockey ring. Mm-hmm. I think that makes the most sense here.
Yeah. You have to remember it may be left over from when Jadis was still in charge.
Oh, you think it's from the winter?
I'm sorry, Jadis.
Well, there's this sound of this thunder of horses' hoofs, right? And everyone looks over, and we see that those small little mammals have unleashed the horses of Narnia. They're coming to the aid of Tyrion. But before there can be any cheering, we hear, and I'll actually just read it, the paragraph that Lewis writes here. Poggin the dwarf and the children opened their mouths to cheer, but that cheer never came. Suddenly the air was full of the sound of twanging bowstrings and hissing arrows. It was the dwarfs who were shooting, and, for a moment, Jo could hardly believe her eyes. They were shooting the horses. Dwarfs are deadly archers. Horse after horse rolled over. Not one of those noble beasts ever reached the king. Mm. And this is the scene, the moment that we have a significant shift in the depiction of these dwarves, in that, before they were, for us as readers, they were frustratingly cynical, although it was understandable why they were.
They were guilty of inaction.
They were guilty of inaction, but we also understood why they might not want to be quick to action. We might have disagreed with them, but it was understandable. They had seen so much bad faith and bad leadership that they kind of had sworn it off completely. Now, that's not the appropriate response, but it is one that you hopefully can at least empathize with. But here, they seem to be killing the horses just out of malice. Like, they're not on anyone's side, right? And yet they do this so that, almost in a way to prove, like, if they're not on anyone's side, why do they care who is, like, what they're doing is illogical according to Griffel's, we don't know what it says. We just think it just says the dwarfs here, but let's say it comes from Griffel, the head dwarf here. This idea of, well, we we're not rooting for your side any more than the other side because we're just for ourselves is illogical because it's a war. Somebody has to win. Mm-hmm. Like in this battle, there will be a winner and there will be a loser. It is unlikely that in the war between the Calormans and the Narnians that they both just go, you know what, we'll go back to our place and you'll go back to your place. And even if they did do that, the dwarves have to live somewhere, right? So saying, well, we're just trying to even the odds doesn't make any sense.
And where do they go when everybody else comes? All the reinforcements come. They don't seem to help with that.
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly choosing a side.
Yeah.
And if they're not choosing a side, then it's almost worse. Then they're just killing just for the sake of, just to spite other people.
Yeah.
Which brings us to an interesting question, and I'll ask it to you, but it's okay if you don't have a perfect answer because you're not prepared for this. Or at least I didn't tell you about this. But, where Lewis is clearly drawing a line between this skepticism of belief to outright malice. There's a line between there. And I don't think Lewis is saying every single person who's skeptical is going to become this malicious. Mm-hmm. I do think he's saying that we're all capable of this. And I'm putting us, I'm not just saying that these dwarves are supposed to be these atheistic, creatures and that this doesn't pertain to you and me as good Christian boys, right? That's not at all what I mean. I very much see myself in these dwarves here. But where is that line between healthy skepticism, right, and an inability to believe? Because there is such a thing as being, at least I believe that not all skepticism is inherently bad, right? If some person just knocked on my door, right now and said, hey, I need, $15,000 because an alien named Joe said they need my help, I would be skeptical of this, right? Yeah. I'm like 99.9999% sure it's not true, but I'm like, I don't know, like weirder stuff has happened.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a silly, very, very silly little story that I just came up with on the spot. Maybe I'll re-record it and we'll say, it'll make it sound a lot better, but I'm not going to do that. The point is, despite my terrible story here, not all skepticism is inherently bad.
Right.
Good skepticism, like when my son says, I washed my hands.
Yeah.
I'm usually like, come over here, let daddy feel your hands. Let me just check. And 50% of the time they're wet. 50% of the time I'm like, there's no way you dry them that well. Okay.
Yeah.
So that can be a healthy skepticism. But where does it become an inability to believe or an inability to see revelation? They're not able to see Aslan revealed to them because they become so skeptical.
I wonder if it's the source of the skepticism. All the examples you just gave are in pursuit of truth. And the dwarves do not seem to be in pursuit of truth. They just seem to not want to pick a side because they feel misled one way, they feel misled another way, they don't want to be made fools of, so they make up their own minds. They stop listening to anyone.
Interesting. You think it's arrogance on their part? I hadn't thought about that.
That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, I love this idea.
Oh.
So from your perspective, you're saying, I took it as being the dwarves are for the dwarves. I guess I never thought about it one way or the other, why they're for themselves.
Yeah.
But
that's the key word that it's a selfish thing. Everything is to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And whatever they consider to be
the idea of I don't want to be taken in because I'm almost ashamed that we were duped once, and so it's not that I can't trust someone because I don't want to get hurt again or I don't want to be led astray. It's more I don't want to be embarrassed. Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. Which is very different than when I ask my son, did you wash your hands? If I'm like, I don't think he did, and then like his hands are wet, I'm like, okay. I was wrong. There we go. But that is true. It is. You're right. It's a pursuit of truth. That's interesting. Well, this scene here, I think some of it also has to do. Some of my answer when I asked myself this question, and Anna and I were talking about it too earlier today as I was just kind of pondering it. I think some of it, like you mentioned, has this. It begins with the refusal of being taken in, right? And I kind of, and I don't think Lewis uses this word in the chapter, but I think he would if he was just talking about it. There's this disillusionment, right? with leadership, with authority, with faith that comes from the dwarves. And as I thought, you're saying the pursuit of truth, and I love that too. Where I went was I literally was thinking through what would be the opposite of being disillusioned. Like I was trying to think, I was like, being illusioned, that's not right, like that's. And so I was like asking, I was like, what would you say? What is the opposite? And we were talking about, we came to the conclusion, like, well, it's enchantment. The opposite of disillusionment is enchantment. And it turns out that as any good idea or revelation or conclusion that I've ever had doesn't come from me. And while it sometimes often comes from my wife, this time it really didn't. It actually came from Lewis. That there's this great essay, which is what I already quoted from earlier, this essay from 1946 called Talking About Bicycles, where Lewis talks about 4 stages of what he calls enchantment. And I would recommend that any of our readers go out and find it. I'm sure that our friends on Lesser Known Lewis will cover it at some point. I looked; they have not covered it yet. I didn't think they had, but I went back just to make sure that they hadn't. They have not covered it as of this recording. I have it in my copy of Present Concerns, which is a collection of journalistic essays by Lewis. I'm sure it's also pretty easily available online. It's only about 6 or 7 pages long. And in this, Lewis talks about bicycles, and it's a dialogue, and he uses this discussion about bicycles to give us as readers an idea of what he calls the 4 stages of enchantment, I guess you could say. And the first stage is he names as the unenchanted age, the unenchanted age. Then there's the enchanted age, then the disenchanted age, and then the re-enchanted age. And it goes kind of like this with the idea of bicycles. There's the unenchanted age where a bicycle is meaningless to a child, right? You see a bicycle, it's relatively meaningless. It doesn't have much. You just don't ponder it or think about it. But then you're enchanted, right? There comes a time when you want to ride a bicycle. You've learned it. You're riding on your own. It's exciting, and it's wonderful and beautiful, right? Then Lewis says this, though, about the third stage. Actually, this isn't him talking. This is the person he's talking to in the dialogue, but it's still him writing. The speaker here says, "But of course I soon reached the third period. Pedaling to and fro from school, it was one of those journeys that feel uphill both ways, and all weather soon revealed the pros of cycling. The bicycle itself became to me what his oar is to a galley slave." "But what is the fourth age?" I asked. Then the speaker continues, "I am in it now, or rather, I am frequently in it. I have had to go back to cycling lately now that there's no car, and the jobs I use it for are often dull enough. But again and again, the mere fact of riding brings back a delicious whiff of memory. I recover the feelings of the second age. What's more, I see how true they were, how philosophical even. For it really is a remarkably pleasant motion. To be sure, it is not a recipe for happiness as I then thought. In that sense, the second age was a mirage, but a mirage of something." "Well, what do you mean?" I said. And then I'll just finish with this last paragraph. "Well, I mean this. Whether there is or whether there is not, in this world or in another, the kind of happiness which one first experiences of cycling seem to promise, still, on any view, it is something to have had the idea of it. The value of the thing promised remains even if that particular promise was false, even if all possible promises of it are false." So this is the fourth stage, the stage of re-enchantment. And when we think of enchantment as being the juxtaposition or the opposite of the disillusionment that the dwarves see, the question then becomes, well, then how do we make sure that we are enchanted? We live in the 21st century in arguably the most disenchanted age that humans have ever lived in.
It sure feels like it.
Right? And we can sit here and scoff at the dwarves and say, well, how silly could they be to not believe in this stuff? There's talking animals here and all of these incredible, unbelievable things are happening. Why wouldn't you also believe in this? But, one of the reasons why I love reading children's literature is because I love thinking about children who are reading these books. Like that's the audience Lewis has in mind, and obviously you and I are not that. But when I think about my 10 and 11-year-olds that I spend a lot of time with, they view the world in a much more enchanted way than I do. You know, things happen in science class. They're like, that's just not real. I get that one all the time. That's just not real. Like, how often do I say that? How often do I go just look at somebody and go, that can't be real? No, can't believe. And if I'm saying that, it's because I'm being skeptical, not because I'm enchanted, going, oh, that can't be real. That's magical.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Instead, I go, oh, that
it's on
that
the more
can't be
negative
real.
side.
Yeah. It's a pejorative expression. And I think when we read fantastical, children's literature like this, I know that's not a real word, but I'm going to go with it, right? Imaginative children's literature, we can actually, this is part of the practice of re-enchanting ourselves to the world we're in and pushing back against the disillusionment that the dwarves come across. Because I think it would be fundamentally arrogant for you and I to read this and look at the dwarves and go, how dare they, without realizing how often I can refuse to take a side in something just because I don't want to be taken in. I don't want to be embarrassed. I've seen the way Christians have done this or that thing badly, and so I don't want to be on the wrong side of this or that, right? And I think that it's not just pressing in deeper to disillusionment or trying to uncover, like being skeptical and then trying to like scientifically prove how these things are possible. It's instead to be enchanted. And I love that Lewis goes through that whole stage of enchantment, right, of those things. It's a little bit not exactly what we're talking about here, but I thought that even reading his 4 stages would be helpful for us to understand how he's thinking about it.
Yeah. I was reading an interview with an author recently who expressed that they wish they could believe in a higher power. And they were approaching all religions as kind of the same. But
yeah. Okay.
What was interesting to me is that there was this desire to believe, and they just felt like they couldn't do it. They couldn't convince themselves that it was real. And that lines up in an interesting way to me with what you just said about being enchanted. He wants to be enchanted. He just feels like he can't. And I think that, to me, what this comes down to is you have to reach out. And I think that Tim Keller, maybe someone else, has this example of reaching out for a limb and grabbing onto it, but you have to reach out. Otherwise, you're not going to know if it's there or not. And then once you do reach out, then you may find that there is something to grab onto.
And I think Lewis's idea of these 4 ages is encouraging too, because it's not, unenchanted and then enchanted and then disillusioned or disenchanted and then just enchanted again. Like, he makes it clear that the idea of re-enchantment is inherently different than being enchanted. And that's why I read that whole paragraph and a half, is because he makes it clear it's not the same thing. In fact, that whole idea of when you were enchanted, that was a mirage, right? Like, when my students say, we look at something in science class, for instance, right? Or some unbelievable story in history, like, that just can't be true. I almost don't believe it, right? Well, eventually they're going to find out that it is true. And that when they said, I just think that, this thing is magic or something. Well, it actually isn't. It's real, But that mirage did mean something, right? And that re-enchantment doesn't mean having to do away with all that has ever occurred before, or even throw away, if you are someone like myself who often finds himself disenchanted or almost embarrassed by previous enchantments, right? Doesn't mean you have to do away with all that stuff. It doesn't mean you have to go, well, I need to get back to that. No, you can take your maturity and you can even bring your cynicism with you, right? But it's a different approach. It's not always the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep moving on. Past the dwarves here, we hear the drums get louder and louder, and the company decides they're going to charge before these reinforcements come in. And Jill is told that she has to stand back on one side, and it has much more to do. I mean, we've come a long way since Lucy and Susan really sitting out from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yes, yeah.
Jill's not sitting out here because she can't fight. It's that she's just much better with a bow.
Mm-hmm.
And so she and Farsight are taking out as many Clormans as possible from a distance while the rest of the company charges ahead. And we get a lot of this from Jill's perspective, as it appears as though the Narnians are doing pretty well. But despite how well they are fighting, there just seem to be more and more Clormans, and that's because they're being reinforced. And you get that sense of, like Helm's Deep or something, where you're like, everybody's fighting well, but it's 300 versus 10,000, and it's just kind of hopeless, right? And like, spoiler alert, there is no Gandalf and Éomer to show up later.
Right.
Sorry, no spoilers for you, but there isn't. The wrong story. That's why it's. There might be something else, but it won't be Gandalf.
Right. There's no crossover.
No.
I love the way it's described too. With a horrible cold shock, Jill noticed a strange thing.
Mm-hmm.
Though Clormines were falling at each Narnian sword stroke, they never seemed to get any fewer. In fact, there are actually more of them now than when the fight began. Yeah. There are more every second. It just seems like, kind of like the Hydra thing. You cut off one head and then 2 or 3 more appear. And,
yeah. And that's where the chapter ends. Any final thoughts before we keep moving further up and further in?
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to figuring out what that means. Nothing here. I will say every chapter has been a real page turner. This book feels so different than the other ones in that it seems that anything can happen. I didn't know that we were going to lose the bear and the boar.
Yeah.
And whenever that happens, especially when it's not the very end, it seems like the rule book has been thrown out the window. And because the title is The Last Battle, we know there are no other books. It really seems like I can't predict what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that feeling. I've had this happen. This happened with Endgame. I thought I knew how Endgame was going to go. The 18th Marvel movie.
Oh, yeah.
But it started, and Infinity War ends with a very, very bad ending.
Mm-hmm.
It just is not going well for anyone. And the movie stops. Part 2 comes out a year later. And it starts out with the exact plot that I thought was going to happen. They all get together. They go try to fix everything. And it just completely does not work. And they find out a piece of information that ruins their plan entirely.
Yeah.
And then 5 years go by. And I feel like we may be set up for something here where Lewis could do anything. Everybody could be gone. No one seems safe at this point.
Yeah. Well, speaking of not being safe, the next chapter, Phil, is called Chapter 12. Well, it's not called Chapter 12. That's just the number. It's called Through the Stable Door. And I'll tell you that in this chapter, Tyrion enters the stable and he meets an unexpected party.
And that's our last chapter with the word stable in it.
Oh, okay. I was like, it's the last one. We jumped ahead. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. There are 3. There's a lot of stable mentioned in the past 4 or 5 chapters.
We've had who will go into the stable. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then the great meeting on Stable Hill, right?
And then through the stable door.
And then through the stable door is the next one. Yeah, you're looking ahead at those chapters. Do you want to just go ahead? We're literally in the home stretch. Read the next titles of the chapters for us.
So, through the stable door, how the dwarves refuse to be taken in. Night falls on Narnia. Further up and further in. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, my word.
You'd like that.
Maybe it's just the title. We can't get too excited. Maybe we'll find out. And Farewell to Shadowlands.
Farewell to Shadowlands. So not the last chapter. You'll find up further up and further in the penultimate chapter. And also, I think we mentioned this, I don't know, probably earlier in the season, maybe in the first episode. But Night Falls on Narnia was one of the original titles for this very book. So Lewis still used it in his chapter.
Interesting.
Originally, also, he was really wanting to do Who Will Go Into the Stable as the name of the book. And people were like, that's not a good title for a book, Jack. Please don't do that.
Most of these chapter titles, to me, sound like song titles, except for Farewell to Shadowlands. That could be an EP, the Farewell to Shadowlands EP.
The Farewell to Shadowlands EP. Okay. What?
I mean, come on. Mainly about dwarves, that'd be great. Through the stable door.
You think a song called Mainly About Dwarves would be a good...
It'd be a spoken word one.
That's the fitter, happier. Like right in the middle, you just have like you know the reference, right?
No.
Okay, computer. Right in the middle, Radiohead. Come on, man.
I just listened to it.
Oh, that's right. You told me you just listened to OK Computer for the first time.
Not the first time, the second time.
I think it's track 7. It's right after Karma Police, but there's
Love Karma Police.
There's just like it's not like auto-tune. It's like a text to speech.
Oh, I do remember that. Yes,
yeah,
that really
so
stood out.
That would be the
They stole it from
mainly
Daft
about
Punk.
dwarfs. Yeah. Well, we do have time for an email before we go, so why don't you read it today?
Sure. This one is from Zach Wheeler. Hello, my name is Zach.
I'm going to tell on you for a second that we had to just re-record you saying that because your knees just cracked in the middle of you reading Zach's introduction.
We usually leave it in because it creates the illusion that we're by a fire. And it's just this gentle...
Well, I looked around and I was like, well, we've got a candle here. In our neighborhood, there's no fireplaces allowed. You know this, right?
Well, yeah, the entire city burned to the ground, and so they overcorrected.
No, that's just,
but the reason it burned down is
we
because
burned it down.
the Confederate we did not do it.
But
the
like
Confederates were leaving, they lit the whole place on fire.
They burned it down though. It wasn't the same thing. It wasn't like the Great Fire of Richmond was lit by actual people.
Here's what actually happened. A Confederate soldier was drying his boots. A spark came out and lit his shag rug on fire. The whole place went up, and they built all the houses in a row, and it went down and down and down, and they thought, we're going to look like idiots if this gets out.
So we'll say it was
we're going to say that we burned the whole city down as we left on purpose.
But yeah, so
surrounded
there's
by
not
water.
not a lot of fires in our neighborhood, unfortunately. I do love going to. Your knees are still doing it, man.
That's
over
my
there.
ankle.
Are you okay?
No.
You need to go to like a.
I have gone to the doctor and I said every joint that I have pops, and they said, well, as long as it doesn't hurt, it's probably fine.
Okay.
I said, well, it hurts my ears.
All right, let's get back.
And they
to
give this smile that makes me think they've heard that joke.
Yeah. They think it's hilarious. Let's go back to Zach's email here, if we can hear it over the sound of your aging body.
Okay, this email is from Zach Wheeler. Hello, my name is Zach, and I am a middle school English teacher. I am certified to teach both English and social studies.
Humanities.
He's an English teacher because he capitalized the word English. Most people would just leave it lowercase.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. I never thought
about it. If it was an informal thing.
Okay.
Your Narnia podcasts have been awesome to listen to. When I originally read the books, I read them in chronological order instead of publication order. So that is also the order I am listening to them. Although y'all may have convinced me that the publication order is the way to go. See, this is what's dangerous about if they don't listen to season 1 first, then they may not hear us say that you have to listen to it in a certain order.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's totally fine though. This is my second year teaching and my first year teaching English. A co-teacher and I decided to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to our 7th grade classes before they got out for Christmas break. We started the book late, so it was more rushed than I had hoped for. Nonetheless, the book has awesome story dynamics for English class, but also awesome truths and themes from one of my all-time favorite authors, C.S. Lewis. I did not find your podcast until early January after we had finished the book, or I would have played them for my class. I'm so glad that you are both sharing your faith into this podcast. As a Christian, this helps me to understand the stories even more. I'm not sure when I will be able to teach the story again, but do y'all have any resources you would suggest using concerning teaching the story? Anything would be helpful. I am currently on episode 3 of Prince Caspian. I have already listened to all of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Magician's Nephew. I know you both said you were novices to the Chronicles, but you both sound like Lewis experts to me.
That's because he's listened to season 6 already. Like,
yeah, no.
He's just, keep going back to those old ones. You'll be like, oh my gosh, these guys know nothing.
That'll do it. Someone told me recently that they started with our most recent full season, and then they said,
no, we read that. That was on an email we did.
No, this was someone who told me just in person.
You told me this. That's right.
Yeah,
never mind.
they haven't written in.
The lines between what happens on the show and what happens just you and I talking get really blurred sometimes.
Blurry. Yeah.
I feel like the longer we podcast, I'm like, wait, did I say this already? And then I'm like, was that a dancing lawn? Was that it gets confusing.
Right. What we need is a full transcript of everything that we can search and find out whether or not we said something before, which would be possible. It's just very expensive. Back to this email from Zach. Thank you for bringing the Chronicles to life through podcast. You both are enjoyable to listen to, and I hope that you will continue to podcast after you finish the Chronicles, possibly Lord of the Rings. Sorry for the long email. Best, Zach Wheeler.
All right. Thank you, Zach, for sending that. I picked this one out because, actually, by the time this comes out, it won't be the case. But it is back to school time as we're recording. I'm going back in about a week or so, and I went back last week. Kids are getting, again, this is meaningless because we're recording it in August, and it's not coming out. But so I was like, I want to do one that's about like a school or teaching related one, which is fun. And I wanted to share, I have some great resources, some of which I have, and I did, Zach is only hearing this because I have emailed him and told him we answered it in this episode because, or else he'd find out like 3 years later, like he's, he's like, I could have used this knowledge as I taught this stuff again. But I also
so smart. That's very kind of you.
Yeah. I also emailed him a few other resources too that are my own that I don't have access to necessarily post, but I can direct message them to someone. But I am also putting in the episode's description for anyone who's interested. One of my favorite resources on wardrobe and Caspian and Dawn Treader. So I went ahead and I shared some of my resources that I've used, some of them that I've created myself, some that I've gotten from other educators. I shared those with Zach already, but I did want to just share for the sake of some of our listeners who might be interested. One of my favorite things that I've come across, besides all my own stuff, obviously, is comes out of the University of Leeds in the UK. I think that's how you say it, Leeds, right? It's not like Leeds or something. Like that's
How do you spell it?
Leeds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They're the ones that have all those eco-friendly light bulbs. The Leeds certified.
Yeah, is that what you call me? I gave him. You tell SJ like, hey, we got some lead light bulbs. They're really good, So it comes out of the University of Leeds, and I don't remember the professor's name or the educator who worked on this, but it's called Narnian Virtues. And one of the cool things that they did in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is it talks a lot about going from vices to virtues. So throughout the course of Wardrobe, I would have students talk about going from foolishness to wisdom, or selfishness to love, weakness to fortitude, intemperance to self-control, injustice to justice, and deceit to integrity. And I never used all of those when I was teaching it, but I would hone in on maybe, and I do the same thing now that I teach Dawn Treader, where I hone in on just 3 virtues that I want us to focus on throughout our journey in one of the books. And just spend a lot of time doing that. And that's pretty normal in how, especially in a classical school, how we teach a lot of any of our, literature studies, that we're always focusing on, wisdom and virtue simultaneously as we're reading. But it's a really interesting, and I believe that curriculum is available online for free. So if I can find it online, I will post it in the episode's description for any other educators out there, or just any parents or anyone else who wants to just read it or look through it on their own. But I have found that idea of working through the Chronicles, through the idea of virtue and growing and being formed in the right ways is the best way to teach the books. I'm not as big of a fan of, here's chapter 1. Here are your 5 new vocab words for you, and then here's some comprehension questions, and then that's just I don't think Lewis would really enjoy or appreciate us teaching that way, because I think that it would just, and not that it's inherently wrong, but it would just really have us lose out on so much more of the depth that's available in those books. And I'm not saying I've never given a quiz on Lewis before. I absolutely have. But I think if that's the only thing we're doing, then we're missing out. So
Yeah, that was cool. It's also, I love the idea of this podcast being in a classroom.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
I play it in my classroom all the time. When I don't want to teach, when I'm just like, I've had enough one day, I'm like, hey guys,
just do one of the pre-recorded
ones. Listen
ones.
to this. That's fine,
Everybody put your earbuds in.
Yeah, so I would not recommend. Not recommend maybe podcasting too much. I would not show my own kids myself in classroom.
Right. I'm really starting to get worried about this second child you're about to have.
Yeah.
Have you just
the second child who's like 2 months old at this point?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. By the time
but at the time of this recording,
sure. Yeah.
Because have you been filming your interactions with your son, and then you're just going to play the tape for your daughter?
What do you? Oh, you mean like on the podcast?
Yeah, and I guess you could just play your podcast in the bassinet, a little speaker thing. No, I'm saying like you've already interacted with a kid for a couple of years. Are you just going to play
am I just going to redo it again?
No, play that tape for your daughter, and just this is what interaction looks like. You can just watch the video.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Zach, thanks so much. And thanks for promoting our podcast in the classroom.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like a separation of church and state, something that violates, but totally fine with me.
You're ridiculous. All right, well, let's go ahead and end this episode. Again, Zach, thanks so much for your email. And best of luck if you are teaching wardrobe again, and best of luck in the upcoming school year, or the school year that you're a few months into at this point.
Yeah.
This episode is made possible by all of our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, and Michelle Girondi for supporting us at our top tiers. If you have any listener feedback, you can always email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. You can also find all of our previous episodes, links, and book information at lamppostlistener.com. We'd always appreciate... As always, we appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts because this helps other listeners join through the podcast with us. That was weird, but I'm leaving it in. Thanks again for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time for Chapter 12.